The alien princess's mother asked, "Do you love my daughter?" I nodded, and tears fell. Sergeant Junho Park stood at his post like a statue carved from stone, his eyes scanning the grand corridor of the Volanti Imperial Station with careful attention. And he never allowed himself to relax, even for a single moment, because that was what a good soldier did. He stayed alert. He stayed ready, and he protected those under his care, no matter what happened around him. The Volanthi were nothing like humans. And Junho had learned this during his first week aboard the station, when he watched them glide through the hallways like living works of art. Their tall, slender bodies wrapped in robes that seemed to flow like water, and their skin held a faint shimmer of silver and blue that caught the light in ways that made them appear almost holy. They lived for centuries, sometimes more than 1,000 years. And they looked at humans the way humans might look at mayflies, brief creatures that appeared and vanished before you could learn their names. Junho did not let their cold stares bother him, because he had a job to do, and he would do it well regardless of what anyone thought about his species or his short lifespan. The peace negotiations between humans and the Volanthi Empire had been ongoing for 3 months now, and progress was slow because neither side fully trusted the other. But at least they were talking instead of fighting, and that was something worth protecting. Princess Alindra walked past him for the 4th time that day, and Junho kept his eyes forward as protocol demanded. But he could feel her gaze lingering on him longer than necessary. She was curious about humans. He had noticed this from the beginning, and she often paused near his post as if hoping he would speak to her. But he never did, because speaking to royalty without permission was forbidden. And he was nothing but a guard from a primitive world. "You stand here every day," Alindra said suddenly, her voice soft and musical like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. And Junho felt his heart jump in his chest, because she had never addressed him directly before. "Yes, Your Highness," he replied, keeping his tone respectful and neutral. "Do you not grow tired?" she asked, tilting her head in that strange way the Volanthi did when they found something confusing. And her large violet eyes studied him with genuine interest. "Tiredness does not matter when duty calls, Your Highness." Alindra smiled, or at least Junho thought it was a smile, because Volanthi expressions were difficult to read, and she continued walking without another word, leaving him alone with the echo of her voice still ringing in his ears. The days passed slowly after that, and Junho found himself watching for Alindra whenever she walked through the corridor, though he never allowed his attention to waver from his duties. Then, the accident happened. A massive decorative crystal structure that hung from the ceiling suddenly broke free from its ancient moorings, and it plummeted toward the floor with deadly speed. And Alindra was standing directly beneath it, frozen in shock as death raced toward her. Junho did not think, he simply moved. His body slammed into the princess, and he threw her clear of the impact zone. But the crystal caught his shoulder and back as it shattered against the floor, and pain exploded through him like fire as shards tore through his uniform and into his flesh. He heard screaming and shouting, but everything seemed distant and muffled as he lay on the cold floor with blood pooling beneath him. And the last thing he saw before darkness claimed him was Alindra's face hovering above him, her violet eyes wide with something that looked almost like fear. When Junho woke, he was in a medical bay that gleamed with technology far beyond anything humans had created, and strange machines hummed softly around him as they worked to heal his wounds at Volanti. Physician told him that he had been unconscious for 2 days, and that his injuries were severe but not fatal. And Junho nodded his thanks before closing his eyes again. He did not expect visitors, but Alindra came anyway. She appeared in the doorway of his recovery room on the 3rd night, her robes rustling softly as she stepped inside without waiting for permission. And she sat in the chair beside his bed as if she belonged there. "Why did you do that?" she asked, and her voice trembled slightly in a way that surprised him. "It is my duty to protect." "No," she interrupted. shaking her head firmly. "That is not what I asked. And you know it. Why did you risk your life for me when you could have simply moved away and let the crystal fall?" Junho was silent for a moment because he did not know how to explain something that felt so natural to him. And finally he said, "Because I could not watch someone die if I had the power to prevent it. Especially not someone innocent." Alindra stared at him with an expression he could not decipher, and then she whispered, "No Velanthi guard has ever done such a thing. They protect from threats, yes. But they do not sacrifice their own bodies. They calculate risk and reward, and they act accordingly. Humans are different." Junho said simply, "Yes," Alindra agreed. And something changed in her eyes as she looked at him. Something warm and curious and almost tender. "Yes, I am beginning to understand that." She visited him every night after that, slipping into his room when the station grew quiet and the corridors emptied. And they talked for hours about everything and nothing. Junho did not know that Empress Velith watched from the shadows with cold disapproval burning in her ancient eyes. And he did not know that his simple act of courage had set into motion events that would change the fate of two species forever. All he knew was that when Alindra smiled at him, he felt something he had never felt before, and it terrified him as much as it filled him with joy. The alien princess's mother asked, "Do you love my daughter?" I nodded and tears fell. The weeks turned into months, and Junho found himself living for those stolen moments when Alindra would appear at his side with questions about humanity that seemed endless. And he answered every single one with patience and honesty because he wanted her to understand his people, the way he was learning to understand hers. They met in hidden corners of the station where security cameras could not see them, and they walked through the observation decks late at night when the stars burned bright against the endless black. And Alindra listened with wonder as Junho told her stories about Earth, about oceans that stretched beyond, horizon and mountains that pierced the clouds, and forests so dense that sunlight never touched the ground. "Your world sounds dangerous," she said one evening as they sat together watching a distant nebula paint the darkness with color. "It is," Junho admitted with a small shrug. "But that danger shaped us into what we are. We learned to fight, to adapt, to survive against impossible odds. And yet you are so gentle," Alindra murmured, and her fingers brushed against his hand so lightly that he almost thought he imagined it. "You save me without hesitation. You speak to me with kindness. You smile when I ask foolish questions. How can creatures forged in violence be capable of such tenderness?" Junho thought about her question for a long moment before answering, and when he spoke, his voice was soft and sincere. "Because we learned that strength without compassion is meaningless, and violence without purpose is destruction. Humans are capable of terrible things. This is true. But we are also capable of love so deep that it transcends logic and reason." "Love?" Alindra repeated the word as if tasting it on her tongue, and her violet eyes glowed faintly in the dim light. "My people form bonds of convenience and political necessity. We pair with those who strengthen our houses and produce heirs to continue our bloodlines. But what you describe sounds different." "It is," Junho said, and something in his chest tightened as he looked at her beautiful face. "Human love is choosing someone not because they benefit you, but because you cannot imagine existing without them. It is wanting their happiness more than your own. It is staying beside them even when you know it will break your heart." Alindra was silent for a long time, and when she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "You live such short lives. How can you love knowing that death will separate you so quickly?" "That is exactly why we love so fiercely," Junho explained. And he turned to face her fully, "Because our time is limited. Every moment becomes precious. We do not take a single day for granted, because we know there may not be another. Something glistened in Alindra's eyes, and Junho realized with shock that she was crying. The Volanti rarely showed emotion, and tears were almost unheard of among their kind. "I think I understand now," she said, and her voice cracked slightly. "I think I finally understand why my people have been so wrong about yours." Their meetings continued, and with each passing day, the bond between them grew stronger until neither could deny what it had become. But they were not as secret as they believed, Empress. Bailiff summoned Junho to her private chambers on a cold morning when the station hummed with tension, and he walked through corridors lined with ancient tapestries that told stories of Volanti conquests across 1,000 worlds. The Empress sat upon a throne of crystallized starlight, her ageless face revealing nothing as Junho knelt before her in the manner he had been taught. "You have been spending time with my daughter," she stated, and her voice was sharp as a blade. "Yes, Your Majesty," Junho replied without hesitation, because lying would only make things worse. "Do you understand what you are?" the Empress asked, leaning forward with cold fury burning in her ancient eyes. "You are temporary, a brief flicker of existence that will fade and vanish before Alindra even reaches the middle of her life. You are insignificant in the grand tapestry of time." Junho felt the words cut into him like knives, but he kept his head bowed and his voice steady. "I understand, Your Majesty." "Then stay away from her," Belith commanded. "She is destined for greatness, and I will not allow a mayfly to distract her from her purpose. Leave my daughter alone, human, or I will ensure you are removed from this station permanently." Junho returned to his quarters with a heavy heart, and he lay in his bed staring at the ceiling as the Empress's words echoed in his mind. She was right. He was temporary, insignificant, a creature whose entire lifespan would be nothing but a brief chapter in Alindra's eternal story. But when Alindra appeared at his door that night with worry written across her face, all of his resolve crumbled like sand in a storm. "My mother spoke to you," she said. "And it was not a question." "Yes. And what did you tell her?" Junho looked into those violet eyes that had become more precious to him than anything in the galaxy, and he tried to find the strength to push her away, to protect her from the complications that their relationship would cause, but he could not do it. "I told her that I understand my place," he said quietly. Eldra stepped closer until she was standing directly in front of him, and her hand reached up to touch his cheek with impossible gentleness. "I do not care about lifespans," she declared, and her voice rang with conviction. "I do not care that you will age while I remain the same. I do not care what my mother says or what tradition demands. Alindra, I care about you," she interrupted, and her eyes blazed with fierce determination. "I care about the way you make me feel alive for the first time in my existence. I care about the kindness in your heart and the courage in your soul, and nothing in this universe will make me abandon that." Junho felt something break inside him, some wall he had built to protect himself from hoping for the impossible, and he pulled her into his arms and held her as if she might disappear if he let go. For the first time since arriving on the station, he allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, love could conquer even the vast divide between their two worlds. The alien princess's mother asked, "Do you love my daughter?" I nodded, and tears fell. The weeks of recovery were slow and painful, but Junho pushed through them with the same stubborn determination that had kept him alive during the attack. And eventually his wounds healed enough for him to walk the corridors once more. But everything had changed. The peace negotiations had resumed after the attack, and security had been tripled across all stations and vessels. But Junho's assignment was ending. His unit was being recalled to Earth, and there was nothing he could do to stop. I stood in his quarters, staring at the orders on his screen, and the words blurred together as his mind raced through impossible scenarios. Alindra found him there, and she knew something was wrong the moment she saw his face. "What is it?" she asked, crossing the room to stand beside him. "I have been recalled," Junho said, and the words felt like poison on his tongue. "My unit leaves in 3 days." Alindra was silent for a long moment, and when she spoke, her voice was steady despite the pain that flickered in her eyes. "Then do not go. It is not that simple." "Yes, it is," she interrupted, turning him to face her with both hands on his shoulders. "Petition my mother for permission to stay. Ask her to grant you status as a diplomatic liaison or a permanent security advisor. There are ways." "Junho, if you want them, your mother hates me," Junho reminded her gently. "She warned me to stay away from you, and I have done nothing but disobey that warning every single day." "My mother does not know you," Alindra countered fiercely. "She sees only your species and your lifespan and your perceived weakness. She does not see the man who nearly died to protect her daughter. The man who makes me feel things I never knew I could feel." Junho reached up to cup her face in his hands, and he marveled at how natural it felt to touch her despite everything that should have kept them apart. "If I petition her and she refuses, I will be humiliated in front of the entire court," he said quietly. "And worse, you will be punished for associating with me." "I do not care about humiliation," Alindra declared, "and I am already punished every moment I spend imagining a future without you in it." She kissed him then, the first time their lips had ever touched, and Junho felt something shatter inside him. Some last barrier that had kept him from fully surrendering to the impossible love that had grown between them. "Please," Alindra whispered against his mouth. "Please try." And because he could deny her nothing, Junho agreed. The throne room of the Volanthi Imperial Palace was even more magnificent than Junho had imagined, with walls of living crystal that pulsed with soft light and a ceiling so high that it disappeared into shadowy infinity. Hundreds of Volanthi nobles filled the gallery seats, their luminous eyes fixed on the small human who walked toward the Empress with measured steps. And Junho felt their judgment pressing down on him like a physical weight. Empress Valeth sat upon her throne of crystallized starlight, unchanged since the last time he had knelt before her, and her expression was as cold and unreadable as blood. Ever Junho stopped at the designated distance and lowered himself to one knee in the traditional posture of supplication. "Rise," the Empress commanded, and her voice echoed through the vast chamber with perfect clarity. Junho stood, but kept his eyes respectfully lowered. "You have come to make a request," Valeth stated, and there was no question in her tone. She already knew why he was here. "Yes, Your Majesty." "Then speak." Junho took a deep breath and forced himself to meet her gaze, despite every instinct screaming at him to look away. "I request permission to remain on the Volanthi Imperial Station as a permanent resident," he said, his voice steady even as his heart pounded in his chest. "I request the opportunity to serve Your Majesty and the Empire in whatever capacity you deem appropriate." A murmur rippled through the gathered nobles, and Junho heard whispers of disbelief and scorn from every direction. And why would a human soldier wish to abandon his own people and pledge himself to an alien empire? Valeth asked, and there was something dangerous lurking beneath her calm words. This was the moment. Junho had known it would come to this, and he had prepared himself for the consequences. But standing here under the weight of 1,000 hostile stares, he found that all his prepared speeches had vanished from his mind, because I cannot imagine returning to a life that does not include your daughter, he said simply, and the raw honesty in his voice silenced the whispers instantly. The Empress rose from her throne and descended the steps with slow, deliberate grace until she stood directly before him, so close that he could see the ancient wisdom and cold fury warring in her eyes. "You speak of my daughter," she said softly, and her voice now carried only to his ears. "You speak of Alindra, who is destined to lead this empire when I am gone, who will live for thousands of years after your brief flame has flickered out." "I know, Your Majesty," And yet you persist. I do. Valus studied him for a long moment. And then she asked the question that would change everything. Do you love my daughter? Junho opened his mouth to answer, to explain, to defend himself with words and logic and reason. But nothing came out. Instead, he simply nodded and tears fell. From his eyes he could not stop them. They spilled down his cheeks like rivers of crystal, carrying with them every fear and hope and desperate longing that he had buried deep inside himself. And he stood before the Empress of the Volanthi with his heart completely exposed and vulnerable. The court was utterly silent. The Volanthi did not cry. Emotion was considered a weakness to be controlled and hidden, and none of them had ever seen anything like this. A creature so overwhelmed by love that he could not contain it, a soul laid bare without shame or reservation. Empress Valith stared at the tears streaming down Junho's face, and something flickered in her ancient eyes that had not been there before. The alien princess's mother asked, "Do you love my daughter?" I nodded, and tears fell. The Peace Summit was supposed to be a celebration of progress between humans and the Volanthi Empire, and delegates from both species gathered aboard the neutral vessel called the Harmonies, edged to sign agreements that would bind their peoples together for generations to come. Junho stood at his assigned post near a main conference hall, his eyes constantly moving across the crowd of dignitaries and officials who mingled in their finest attire. And he felt the familiar weight of responsibility pressing down on his shoulders. Eldrin was somewhere in that crowd, representing her mother's interests as a princess of the Empire. And knowing she was nearby gave Junho both comfort and anxiety in equal measure. Something felt wrong. Could not explain it, just a tingling sensation at the base of his skull that warned him of danger lurking in the shadows, and he had learned long ago to trust his instincts because they had saved his life more times than he could count. The first explosion ripped through the eastern corridor with a deafening roar, and Junho was moving before the sound even finished echoing through the ship. Screams erupted from everywhere as delegates scattered in panic, and more explosions followed in rapid succession, tearing holes in the hull and filling the air with smoke and fire. And Junho pushed through the chaos with only one thought burning in his mind: find Elendre. Found her surrounded by 3 assassins wearing masks that marked them as members of an extremist faction that opposed any alliance with humanity, and they had already killed her guards, leaving her alone and defenseless against their energy blades. Junho did not hesitate. He crashed into the first assassin from behind and snapped his neck with a brutal twist, then grabbed the fallen energy blade and drove it through the second attacker before he could react. The third assassin slashed at Junho with desperate fury, and the blade caught him across the chest in a burning line of agony. But he ignored the pain and threw himself forward, tackling the assassin to the ground and ending his life with a single precise strike. Junho, Elendre cried, rushing to his side as he staggered to his feet with blood streaming from his wound. "We have to move," he gasped, grabbing her hand and pulling her toward the emergency corridors. "The ship is compromised. We need to reach the escape pods." They ran through burning hallways filled with bodies and debris, and with every step, Junho felt his strength fading as blood continued to pour from his chest wound. But he refused to stop because stopping meant death for both of them. More assassins appeared ahead, blocking their path, and Junho pushed Elendre behind him as he raised his stolen blade to face them. "Go around," he ordered. "There is another route to the pods through the maintenance tunnels. I will not leave you." Elendre shouted. "You will," Junho said firmly, and he turned to look at her one last time with love and determination burning in his eyes. "Because I need to know you are safe. That is all that matters to me." Before she could argue, he charged at the assassins with a roar that echoed through the corridor, and his blade flashed in the emergency, lighting as he cut down the first 2 attackers with moves that seemed almost superhuman in their speed and precision, but there were too many of them. They overwhelmed him with sheer numbers, and blades cut into his arms and legs and back until he collapsed to his knees with blood pooling around him. But still he kept fighting, kept swinging his weapon at anything that moved, kept buying precious seconds for Alindra to escape. When the last assassin finally fell, Junho's body gave out completely, and he crumpled to the floor with barely enough strength left to breathe. Alindra was there. She had not left him, and her hands pressed against his wounds as she screamed for help that might never come. "Why?" she sobbed, her tears falling onto his face like warm rain. "Why did you not run with me? Why do you always sacrifice yourself?" "Because you are worth it," Junho whispered. And his vision was fading now, the edges growing dark and blurry. "You are worth everything." He did not remember the rescue. He did not remember the emergency medical team that found them huddled together in that bloody corridor, or the desperate surgery that saved his life by the narrowest of margins. When he finally woke, he was in a medical bay that smelled of antiseptic and sorrow, and Alindra was sitting beside his bed with her hand wrapped around his, as if she had been there for days. "You almost died," she said, and her voice was hoarse from crying. "But I did not." 3 times, Alindra continued, ignoring his response. "Your heart stopped 3 times. And 3 times, the physicians brought you back. They said they had never seen anyone fight so hard to survive." Junho tried to smile, but even that small movement sent pain shooting through his battered body. "I had something worth fighting for." The door opened, and Empress Valeth entered the room with slow, measured steps, her ancient eyes taking in the scene before her daughter's tear-stained face. The human soldier covered in bandages and machines. The way Alindra refused to release his hand even in her mother's presence. The Empress said nothing. She simply stood there watching for a long moment, her expression unreadable behind centuries of practiced composure. And then she turned and left without a single word. Junho did not know what that silence meant, but as he drifted back into healing sleep with Alindra's warmth beside him, he decided that he no longer cared about politics or protocol or the opinions of empresses. He cared only about the woman who had stayed with him through fire and blood, and nothing in the universe could change that. The alien princess's mother asked, "Do you love my daughter?" I nodded, and tears fell. The silence stretched through the throne room like a living thing, heavy and suffocating, and Junho stood before the Empress with tears still falling from his eyes, because he could not stop them. No matter how hard he tried, he had expected anger. He had expected disgust or dismissal or cold rejection, but Empress Valeth simply continued to stare at him with an expression that slowly, gradually began to change. "I have lived for over 2,000 years, she said finally, and her voice was different now, softer, almost contemplative. "I have seen empires rise and fall, stars burn out and new ones ignite, civilizations that spanned galaxies reduced to dust and memory." Junho remained silent, not trusting himself to speak. "In all that time, I have witnessed countless declarations of love," Valeth continued, turning to pace slowly before her throne. "Noble houses pledging eternal loyalty, political unions sealed with grand ceremonies, bonds formed and broken based on convenience and advantage." She paused and looked back at him with those ancient, knowing eyes. "But I have never, not once in 20 centuries, seen someone bare their soul so completely without protection or pretense." The nobles in the gallery shifted uneasily, uncertain of what their empress was saying or where her words were leading. "I watched you through the surveillance feeds after the attack," Valeth admitted, and Junho felt his heart clench at the unexpected revelation. "I watched you kill 3 assassins without hesitation to save my daughter. I watched you take wounds that should have been fatal. I watched you fight even when your body had nothing left to give." she stepped closer to him again. And this time, there was no hostility in her posture. "Do you know what my advisors told me when I asked them to explain your behavior?" she asked. "No, Your Majesty. They could not," Velis said. And something that might have been a smile touched the corner of her lips. "They analyzed your actions from every possible angle: tactical advantage, political motivation, career advancement, and none of their explanations made sense." She reached out and did something that made the entire court gasp in shock. She touched his face, her slender fingers tracing the path of his tears with unexpected gentleness. "Because they were looking for rational reasons," she continued. "And there are no rational reasons for what you did. There is only love. Pure and irrational and absolutely genuine." Junho could barely breathe as the Empress of the Volanthi Empire held his face in her hands like he was something precious and fragile. "My daughter came to me after the attack," Valeth said. "She told me that she had found something she never believed existed, a soul that matched her own, a heart that beat in rhythm with hers, despite every difference that should have made such a connection impossible." She released him and stepped back, her posture straightening into something regal and commanding once more. "I told her that humans were temporary, that loving one would only bring her pain when their brief lives ended." Junho braced himself for the rejection he knew was coming. "But she asked me a question that I could not answer," Valeth continued, and her voice rang through the throne room with renewed strength. "She asked me whether 1,000 years of comfortable emptiness was truly better than a few decades of genuine happiness." The Empress turned to address the entire court, her presence commanding every eye in the vast chamber. "I have spent 2 millennia pursuing power and legacy, and the continuation of my bloodline," she declared. "And in all that time, I have never once felt what I saw in that human's eyes today. I have never loved anything with such complete and devastating sincerity." She walked back to her throne and turned to face Junho one final time. "Perhaps," she said softly, "perhaps I am the one who has been living a brief and meaningless existence, not him." And then she did something that no Volanthi Empress had ever done in recorded history. She bowed her head to him. Nobles erupted in confused whispers and shocked exclamations. But Valeth silenced them with a single raised hand. "Junho Park of Earth," she proclaimed, her voice carrying the weight of imperial authority. "I grant you permanent residency within the Volanthi Empire. I grant you status as a recognized citizen with all the rights and protections that status entails, and I grant you my blessing to pursue a formal bond with my daughter, Princess Alindra, should that be her wish as well." The doors at the far end of the throne room burst open, and Alindra rushed through them with tears streaming down her own face. Having watched the entire exchange through the public broadcast that every citizen could access, she ran across the polished floor without any care for protocol or dignity, and she threw herself into Junho's arms with such force that he nearly fell. He caught her and held her tight, burying his face in her hair as relief and joy and overwhelming love crashed through him like waves against the shore. "You stupid, brave, wonderful human," Alindra sobbed against his chest. "I told you she would understand, I told you." Junho laughed through his own tears, actual laughter that echoed through the throne room and made several nobles flinch at its raw emotional power. "You were right," he admitted. "You were absolutely right." Empress Valeth watched them from her throne, and the smile that crossed her ancient face was small but genuine. "Perhaps," she murmured to herself, "humans are not so insignificant after all. Perhaps it is we who have been too afraid to burn as brightly as they do." 10 years later, Junho stood on the observation deck of the Imperial Station with a small child in his arms. A child with his dark hair and her mother's violet eyes. A perfect blend of two species that the galaxy had once believed could never be joined. Alindra stood beside him, her hand resting on his shoulder as they watched the stars together. "Are you happy?" She asked the same question she had asked every year since their bonding ceremony, and every year, Junho gave her the same answer. I have never been happier in my entire life. He knew his time was limited. Humans aged so quickly compared to the Volanthi, and he could already see silver beginning to appear in his hair, while Alindra remained unchanged but that no longer frightened him because he understood now what he had tried to explain to her so many years ago, that a life measured in decades could contain more love and joy and meaning than a life measured in millennia. He had chosen her, and she had chosen him, and together they had created something beautiful that would echo through the ages. Long after his brief flame finally flickered out, the child in his arms gurgled happily and reached toward the stars with tiny fingers. And Junho smiled as he imagined all the adventures that awaited her in a galaxy that was finally learning to see humans not as primitive mayflies, but as creatures who burned so brightly that even the oldest and wisest species in the universe had to shield their eyes. I love you, Alindra whispered. I know, Junho replied, pulling her closer with his free arm. And I love you today, tomorrow, and for whatever time I have left. The stars blazed eternal above them, but the warmth between them burned brighter still.